Hi, my name is Eric Nathan. I'm composer in residence of the New England Philharmonic.
Hi, everyone. I'm Danny Madden, and I'm concertmaster of the New England Philharmonic.
And we welcome you tonight to Listening In, a deep dive with the NEP. It's a series where we speak to composers and performers about their art and work, but we also help our audiences hear this music, taking a step behind the scenes to see how it's created, what's inspired it, and how performance of it have come together. You can find an archived history of these videos on our website and YouTube page. And today, if you're logged into YouTube, you can chat live with us and ask questions, which we'll get to during the session today. So today we're very pleased to welcome Matthew Aucoin, who's an American composer, conductor, writer, pianist, and a 2018 MacArthur Fellow. He's artist in residence at the It seems like something might have happened with our system here, but I'll see if we're still going. We're here with Matthew Aucoin, who's an American composer, conductor, writer, pianist, and 2018 MacArthur Fellow. He's artist in residence at the Los Angeles Opera and has worked as a composer with the Metropolitan Opera and also as a conductor in the Lyric Opera of Chicago, American Repertory Theater, Los Angeles Philharmonic, and more, and is co-artistic director of American Modern Opera Company. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Eric. Glad to be here.
So the NEP on February 18th is going to be giving the world premiere of Matt's Two Dances, which is a brand new orchestration of two previous chamber works. And this is scored for two violin soloists, which include our concertmaster Danny Madden, as well as guest violinist Kirgo Gwilt. And it's also scored for full orchestra. And these two movements that were previous chamber works are Shaker Dance and California Dance. And so today we'll learn a little bit more about these works, hearing from the composer himself about them and about the process of turning a chamber piece into an orchestra work. But first, what I'd like to do is jump right in by listening to some music. And I feel it can be helpful to have some frame of reference before we start talking about the music and giving us a jumping off point. So I'm going to open here with the first minute of the performance from the Ojai Festival this summer of Shaker Dance. Let me try that one more time. Here we go. Very
So
exciting.
that was so exciting. And right away, the piece describes you, even though it starts with such small forces, just the two violins starting out. But we were wondering at the NEP, what makes this a shaker dance?
It's a great question. Um, uh, this was a piece that was originally part of a much larger work called The No One's Rose, theater piece that I developed with the ensemble that I co-founded, the American Modern Opera Company. And the decor of the first production was largely inspired for our director Zach Winokur by shaker furniture and the whole wooden shaker aesthetic. So there is a New England connection here, and so there was I can't really speak to it beyond being inspired by some of the visual patterns that are available in renderings of that stuff. Of course, there's quite a famous piece by John Adams called Shaker Loops, which takes a very different, I think, approach to the kind of ecstasy of these imagined religious gatherings. But I was kind of inspired by these visual images. Also, I think it's not coincidental, probably, that this was the first thing a lot of us did in 2021, coming out of the shutdown. It was certainly the first kind of large scale piece we had done. And so this particular dance was just this kind of eruption of energy. We knew we needed a moment where the energy kind of boiled over. And I remember it was written very quickly. I think it felt like it's kind of this cathartic thing that was it's very early 2021. I think we all remember what that moment felt like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can really hear the energy just totally exploding here, and it has such a dancey quality to it. In the music, there are these what we call odd rhythms or odd meters of where we have groupings of unequal lengths of beats of 2 and beats of 3. Our listeners may know in a lot of classical music we have a lot of even beats of 4, beats of 3, but consistently. In this, we keep jumping from one to another, which is similar to a lot of folk musics around the world. So I was wondering if that element of the use of rhythm came from, or are there other inspirations for that as well?
Absolutely. I couldn't tell you which folk music. Maybe it's an imaginary folk tradition, but a couple of the dancers in Amok, the ensemble that premiered the staged version of this piece, spent a lot of time in the Bat Sheva dance company in Tel Aviv. One of them, Or Schreiber, is from Israel originally, and there's nothing even or foursquare about his dancing or the dancing of any of these dancers. It has this kind of unpredictable quality, and I never thought of it this way until now, actually. But Or and another dancer named Yannis Logothetis often have a kind of playful quality to their duets in which they know each other so well that it feels almost like they're trying to trip each other up. There's a quality in which there's a sense in which their dances are also playfully competitive, like you're in a boxing ring a little bit. And I think that energy spilled into this dance as well. The fact that it's also for 2 soloists plus ensemble. There's a sense in which the soloists are maybe trying to trip up the ensemble. Danny, we'll see the extent to which that actually is a risk as we rehearse the piece, as you rehearse the piece. So yeah, I think, Eric, you're right to mention that kind of folk quality.
I mean, in sections, it reminds me of klezmer music. There's a sort of a wailing, wild quality, and the simmering of the parts sort of comes to a boil and keeps going, which is the energy of it is fabulous. But I want our listeners to know that the video that we saw and heard just a few minutes ago, that was cello and violin solo. And Matt scored it now for 2 solo violins plus orchestra. So the little discrete motions that you see actually do sort of remind me of a flicking or a shaking thing, because Matt takes a little melody and instead of playing single notes, we play double notes. And the effect in the right arm is like this, like shaking or flicking, which that whole feeling of it makes it come alive in your arms in such a way that you really feel that something is going to happen, and indeed it does. When you created those double note passages, were you thinking of anything like that, or was it just an effect that you were going for?
It's a great question. I mean, the word thinking is always feels a little bit wrong when you speak of composing, because you are thinking, but you're also feeling, and it's an instinctive thing as well. I guess I would say that there is a, a contrast in the piece between the very, very light 16th notes that you mentioned, and the much heavier eighth notes, in a way, a lot of uh, the shape of the piece is kind of predicated on that, on the 16th notes being light as air, and then the eighth notes having a lot more kind of gusto and weight to them. Um, uh, I think I remember in early conversations we talked about kind of the feeling that we all had this energy in us that if we didn't channel it right, it was gonna burst and do something damaging. I think that that beginning is kind of the sense of that energy being in the air, and then when it switches to eighth notes, it starts to really be channeled or unleashed.
I thought it's interesting how Danny is thinking about the physicality of the performance and how that, whether there's tyings in with the conception of the piece. And I know you're a performer, you're also a conductor. Does the physical act of performing this piece we were talking about, all the irregular beats, that this was an unconducted performance, but we'll have it be conducted. And looking at the score, it's actually there's a lot for the conductor to do. It's almost a little bit like the Rite of Spring could be a test for a conductor of their prowess. So, are there elements of the physicality of being a conductor that influence the way what you create, or are you more separated when you're composing from being a performer?
I mean, we were talking a bit before about how the performance that you all heard a snippet of, I think everyone did such a spectacular job, and it was indeed unconducted. I think this is maybe one of those pieces that's hard to conduct and easier to feel.
Hmm.
The conducting can feel a bit busy if you're not careful, though I know Tian will do a fantastic job with it. But in general, for me, yeah, the physical experience of conducting is really helpful, I find, when composing. And Eric, I know you've done some conducting as well. I'd be curious to hear your perspective on it. I find that sometimes when I'm stuck composing, when I've reached an impasse, one thing that I'll do to get myself unstuck is to conduct the piece to myself up until that moment. And sometimes you'll just physically sense what will has to happen next. And you might not have noticed that if you were just sitting there using, if your brain were the only muscle you were using. Sometimes if you engage your whole body, it can tell you different things. So I do think it's helpful.
Well, that's really interesting to hear about using the physicality as a way of kind of getting you through a creative impasse, or finding a new way of thinking. Yeah, I do actually conduct almost the whole process while I'm composing, and I've actually just conducted sections that haven't existed yet and videotaped myself conducting them to then transcribe what the music should be because I know how it should feel and the pacing of it. So yeah, it's interesting to how these parts of our brain can maybe get connected in different
You
ways.
should release those videos someday.
I don't know. I'm pretty as conductors go. You might be like he's emoting a little bit too intensely,
Or at least there could be like a Marina Abramovich performance piece that's based on
right?
imaginary. I don't know. I think it's amazing.
That's a beautiful idea.
So, what was it like turning this chamber piece for a few players into an orchestral piece?
To answer that, I should start at the end in a way. There are two movements, of course, and two dances. The second one is quite a bit longer than the first, and it starts as a dance, and I think it ends up somewhere else. It's kind of a dance that it sort of becomes orchestral, even in the chamber version. There's a long section near the end where the whole ensemble is playing in rhythmic unison, these kind of hammer blow repeated gestures. And the original version is for two violins and I think eight other musicians, so it's a chamber ensemble. And I remember in rehearsal for the premiere thinking, gosh, I really could use an orchestra for this part. It's almost like I wanted there to only be an orchestra for that part. It's like the opposite of the Haydn's Farewell Symphony, where musicians kind of melt away off stage. This is the opposite of that. I wanted musicians to be walking on stage until there are 100 on stage by the end. So that was kind of the spark that made me think this could work with a bigger ensemble. Also, the wonderful Ara Guzlimian, who is the artistic director of the Ojai Festival, said after the performance in Ojai that he thought that should really be expanded into a real double concerto, that movement, and I kind of felt that he was right.
It doesn't feel oppositional either. When the two violins are playing for quite a while by themselves at the beginning of California Dance, and then gradually attrition, people coming in.
Yeah.
And by the time you get to those hammer blows and the whole orchestra is unison, hammer strokes, it's a real thrill. And of course, Eric and I were so curious, what is that section? What were you thinking there? What prompted the hammer blows?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer for that.
Did it just sort of, organically it came to that the only place you could go was?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably, this is a little abstract for people who haven't heard it yet, but these hammer blows we're describing, it's not like they're totally devoid of pitch. They're repeated hits on somewhat familiar chords that change over a couple of minutes.
Well, I was kind of thinking of them as this as being a very dramatic moment, and it got me thinking about how much you've written in dramatic musical forms such as opera with text, and this piece, Shaker Dance, was performed at the Ojai's at the end of Family Dinner, which also was a work with text in it, and thinking about writing for instrumental music, and it felt like this part of the story, something has happened. And so I'm wondering how you think about drama in your music, and particularly when you're just writing for instruments, and maybe I sometimes think that there's not sometimes a reason why I come to a section in a piece. It's where the story needed to go, or where the characters led us in some way.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. This is actually helping me towards, I think, a more truthful answer, which is that at the beginning of the piece, there are two soloists and there's the ensemble. And at the end of the piece, in this section, everybody is speaking together. The soloists have kind of become dissolved into the ensemble. And you mentioned that the second movement comes from a piece called Family Dinner, which is kind of a portrait of this ensemble that I founded, Amok. And the piece is a series of mini concertos in a way. A different instrument or artist is centered in every movement. So it did feel kind of inevitable that everyone speaks together at the end, and that the whole idea of a soloist has to disappear. That's maybe more palpable in the original Family Dinner than it is in our new version, but I think it's still relevant, because I think it should feel sort of like the two violin soloists are inviting everyone into the dance. There's a section before the hammer blows where you guys kind of stir the soup kind of faster and faster over the course of a couple of minutes. So yeah, everyone's sucked in by the end.
It's great. There's all this layering of themes and almost contrapuntal. And then when you get to that unison section where everybody's playing the same thing, it's thrilling to be a part of a large whole like that, a big orchestra, and you're one voice in the big tapestry. It's a fantastic effect, and the audience, I think, will really respond to it.
I hope so. And we've gone on the record to say that it's supposed to be Tutti playing loud. I don't want to hear anyone saying, I couldn't hear the soloists for the last 4 minutes.
Yeah, they may be consumed, but that's the goal, is that they become one at the end. Yeah, before we take a listen to Shaker Dance, I thought I'd just point our audience's ears in some directions. That when I first heard this piece and also California Dance, I was really struck by the melodic invention, or maybe I should say reinvention, that there's a cell of a theme that you hear at the beginning that we already heard, that then keeps returning but in slightly different guises, and it gets passed to other instruments and kind of spun around and turned around, and it's continually exciting. I was really thrilled after listening to it, and just wondering, first for our audience to keep that in mind while they're listening, to have this thing you hear at the beginning and try to trace it as you follow through. But just for Matt, I'm wondering how you think of developing an idea. It did also remind me a little bit of Stravinsky in how he likes to jump cut between different sections and didn't of material. Didn't know if that's an influence.
It's totally an influence. I think Stravinsky's a part of anybody's balanced diet, or should be. Not all of my music has such kind of sharp elbows or angles as this piece does, but Eric, I think you really are reading my mind. There was a bit of not jump cutting, but reordering internally with this piece, which doesn't usually happen for me, in the sense that in an early draft, some of the material happened in a different order, and at the last minute, I kind of cut a block here and moved it there, which does create a kind of jump cut effect. And I think it does depend on the nature of the material. I think it works best when the material has a kind of dry or angular quality, which much of Stravinsky's music does. Harrison Birtwistle's music too, and I know he operated with similar techniques. So yeah, it's an unusual thing, but I think it's relevant for this piece.
Great. Well, while you listen, think up some questions to ask afterwards, and so we'll take a listen to this piece, Shaker Dance. It's about 4 minutes long.
Fabulous. It's
Yeah,
exciting, so exciting. The
you get
small focus, the large focus, it's so great, the contrast in the piece between the size of the forces and then the forcefulness of the forces. It's just a thrill.
They really nailed it in that performance. I can't take any credit for that.
yeah, you really have the wailing clarinet at the end, which, as Danny was mentioning, some klezmer echoes here, just really rocking out there at the
Yeah,
end.
that part's actually in the original version open improv. So Gleb
Mm,
Kanasovich brought that, but
yeah,
I can't
interesting.
take credit for that moment either.
Yeah. Well, I think what's so exciting about hearing this piece at this moment as we prepare to listen in 2 weeks to the world premiere is that so often with a world premiere, the audience hears nothing before they hear the premiere. But here we've given you like the raw materials, and so you can go back, you could find this on YouTube, listen a few more times, and start to imagine how could this turn into an orchestra piece for two violins instead of violin and cello. So I think that can be something exciting and but also tantalizing that you won't have heard, at least from us, the California dance, though it does exist online if anyone wants to find it. Um, I'd like to open it up to questions, and I see we do have a question here. Says Shaker Dance 144 to 152 and 172 to 176 beats per minute. What were you thinking? Aspirational or necessary for the desired effect? So we're talking here about the tempo marking, the speed of the piece, whether going from 144 clicks per minute to 176, which is a very fast speed.
I think this may be someone in the orchestra because it's what was I thinking in making it so fast is the
Yeah.
seems to be the thrust of the question. And I think those tempo markings refer to the beginning of Shaker Dance and the beginning of California Dance,
I see.
respectively.
Yeah.
Um, well, it's funny. All I can say is in the performance you just heard, I'm almost 100% sure the performers not only met those tempo markings, but sometimes even exceeded them and played a bit faster, which I welcome in the heat of the moment. And in the second movement, if sorry, if people who are not performing musicians, this might all sound a little bit like math, but yeah, a quarter note equals 176 might sound fast, but really you're not supposed to feel the quarter note in the second movement. You're supposed to feel a bigger beat. You know, I once assisted a very great a British composer who works often in Boston. I'll put it that way, and was playing piano for one of his operas, and the tempo marking, and he was conducting. The tempo marking was so off from what he was doing that I had I gathered the courage to ask, Maestro, this is a little bit different. And he sort of said, "Oh, the tempo markings are all totally wrong in the score," which was very funny to me because they seem so specific. But it remains true, I think, that you sort of put down a tempo marking for an ideal circumstance, and then the size of the ensemble, the acoustic of the hall, the personality of the soloists, all of that has an effect, kind of a force of gravity effect. So it's definitely not to be taken 100% literally. I don't know how you feel about that question, Eric.
Oh yes, I was about going to say very similar things that sometimes you have it in your head how it sounds, but when someone actually plays it, you might feel, oh, it actually needs to be a little slower or it needs to be faster. And I've had places where performers have taken it 30 beats per minute faster than I wrote, which totally changes the piece, but it actually made it into a piece that was, I think, even better than the one that I wrote. It became like a totally exciting, like virtuosic thing, which if I had written that, people might have thought, you're insane, how could anyone play that? But if you ever someone who really works at it, you might find a hidden secret to your music from the performer's perspective. Which is what's so beautiful about writing music for live performers, is that the composer has an idea, but then it's really a dialogue or handing it off to the performer who then has their own idea, and what you hear as an audience member is a kind of melding of two ways of seeing things.
And I mean, Danny, how do you think about that with composers who maybe aren't with us anymore? Do you sort of think, okay, well, this is the ballpark, or maybe do you sometimes think, I'm going to go out on a limb and trust that something really radical might work?
Exactly. That's what it's like. And ever since, was it Eric Leinsdorf wrote The Composer's Advocate? We've been, as performers, we've been, taught that everything the composer puts in the score is the Bible. Do not touch, obey the score. But there are times when you can tell what the composer is getting at, and physically it might not be possible to do. Bartok is like this, right? Crazy fast tempos in Bartok quartets. But they're in a sense aspirational. They give you the guide, you have the blueprint, you work towards it. You might not get all the way, but you get it as far as you can with the flesh of your hands. And with an orchestra, right? It's such a bigger animal than a chamber group. The bones are bigger. It takes longer for the sound to travel from the trombone section, through the strings to the audience. So all of that plays a part in how quickly we can actually go and have the music be coherent to the people in the hall, especially a reverberant hall, right? Where you just have to sort of tweak it a little bit so you can hear the themes and you could hear the detail in the work. But that said, here at the New England Phil, rehearsing your piece, Tien is he's wonderfully keeping it as close as possible to what you wrote. And the other day we got pretty close. I'm happy.
That's so exciting. Well, and I'm really excited to come hear you all rehearse it this weekend, because I'm sure that just the force of that sound will have an effect on my thinking about it too. So it's a living thing.
That's right.
You were going to get the definitive edition after this rehearsal. The edits. Hopefully not many edits, but sometimes I go back after a conductor has performed and I may listen to their recording and change the tempo markings if I really preferred what they thought. They found how to phrase this section. They needed to pull back a little bit here.
Of course, there's that frightening comment Beethoven made, apparently, where he says, oh, well, of course the tempo marking's only good for the first couple of measures. Which is just like, right. Oh, yes, of course.
Let it flow. Let it flow. Yeah.
I like that.
Very cool. Well, I'm just curious, what's on your plate now? What's next that you're working on as a composing?
Well, I did just finish maybe 11 or 12-minute orchestral piece that sort of unusually the orchestra of the Met Opera will be playing later this spring. Now, there are no singers involved. It's a pure orchestra piece. But I am in early phases of figuring out what the next opera-shaped piece will be, but it's a little early to really talk about it. The one thing I've learned from having been through that ringer a couple of times is that writing an opera is like getting married to someone. You have to really be sure that you're ready to live with an idea for like 5 years. So I'm laying some groundwork.
Well, that's very exciting. Look forward to hearing this new piece for the Met Orchestra and hear what stories you tell us to come.
Thank you. It's great to join you both, and looking forward to seeing you in person.
Yes.
Everyone come to the concert.
Yes, so everyone come February 18th at Jordan Hall, Matt Aucoin's premiere of 2 dances. We also have a premiere of new work by Ellen Tafe-Swilich. We have in contemporary works by Kareem Rustrum and Elijah Daniel Smith, as well as Rachmaninoff symphonic dances. So it should be an evening of what we call poetic dances. So hope to see you then, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Matt.